Hey, Sarah, can you hear me now? I haven't been talking.
I respect your privacy and only listen when you're talking to me.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Just to confirm, everyone can hear me. Okay, Sarah, it might be on your end because I'm getting the thumbs up from people. So check your audio output if it's going to a device or not. All right, everyone, thank you for joining. Training Peaks 201. A few of you may have come to the first one we did. I'm going to do a little bit of review at the beginning. I'm trying to keep an eye on everything. So if you have a question, the chat is certainly a great place to do that, and I'll scan through that at the end. You can also do, if it's kind of relevant right now, you can do the little hand raise icon, and then I'll kind of shoot over to you to let you ask. And tonight the goal is to provide a little bit more information about Training Peaks and digging in a bit into the workouts themselves, and how and why, honestly a little bit of why coaches prescribe training, and what we're going for in workouts and what we're looking for in the workouts, which then obviously can help athletes better complete them. So I'm going to dive straight into it. Everyone can see the presentation as well. Is everyone able to see that? The understanding Training Peaks. Everyone can see that. Awesome. Thank you, Casey. Okay. I'm going to do a quick review. The first two slides were last week. So when you guys look at your app, when you jump on Training Peaks, I know this is what a lot of people see. Probably not a CTL quite as high as 110, but you see the same fitness, form, fatigue. I'm not going to go super in depth. I'll send out the slides to that presentation we did earlier this year as well. So those of you who weren't there want to review. But essentially, I think the thing I want to get across is that fitness number, that form number, that fatigue number, those are all built from the TSS you accumulate in the workout. That's a key reminder. And we'll talk a little bit about that's why it's important to have good, clean data. And honestly, what us coaches spend a lot of time doing is trying to keep the data clean for you guys, to make sure it's good and accurate when numbers are off. So that's just kind of a reminder on that. This is the performance manager chart. This is the blue filled line is what they call fitness. Again, as a reminder, fitness really is chronic training load. So it's the amount of training you're doing consistently, the amount of training you're doing regularly, sort of hours. It's not just hours because it's taking into account everything, but it's not telling you how fast you are. It just tells you how much load you are under. So two athletes, one an 8-hour, 9-hour, 10-hour Ironman athlete, another a 15-hour Ironman athlete, they could have identical CTLs going into a race. That doesn't mean they're going to go the same speed. That just means they're training about the same volume, and about the same balance of volume and intensity. Okay. That being said, it is for triathletes, it's a pretty good marker of overall general conditioning. When I have an athlete whose CTL, if they're a triathlete, whose CTL, whose chronic training load is under 60 or 70, That's usually the first thing we want to do is just build the chronic training load up to that. And we're going to do that primarily through aerobic work. Once the chronic training load gets higher and maybe has been consistent for a while, then we can start adding some intensity in. Um, Another thing to note is that it does not work uh, great for runners. It works pretty well for cyclists. It doesn't work great for runners because the volume runners train is a lot lower in terms of hours, and the performance manager chart does not capture really well the impact that running has. So an athlete who's running 70 or 80 miles a week might have a CTL of 80 or maybe 90. That's a lot of running. That amount of running in terms of the caliber of the athlete and the amount of load is much more equivalent to a triathlete training 20-ish hours a week, even though it might only be 10 to 14 hours a week of running. So I kind of keep an eye on the CTL for runners, but honestly, I use time, just hours a week and miles, the good old fashioned miles, quite a bit as well. Thought I could advance. No. All right. Okay. Um, since we're going to talk about individual workouts, I wanted to dive a little bit into how us coaches kind of go through the planning, the steps of planning we do. An athlete I know, they see their workout pop up, they get an email, today I'm supposed to do this, and this. This is a little bit of an idea of the planning that goes into it. So I kind of broke it down into four different periods. The first is the macro plan. That's where we're looking at the entire year or the entire season or the entire build to a key event. Some athletes may have, one key race they're doing. I'm doing an Ironman in November. I'm doing a marathon in January. One or two smaller events, but that's the big A race. We have 20 weeks till that. We as coaches can kind of set a macro plan. What are the goals? What is the athlete is a limiter for the athlete that we want to work on early in that build versus middle versus late in the build? Where is the athlete at in their life and what are they able to handle? Just because they have the same goal doesn't mean they're able to handle the same amount of training load. Then we go into that more micro plan, which is training the week or 2 weeks of training essentially. So that we're going to be looking at and trying to pay attention to a few more acute things. What's the athlete's fatigue levels? What are their current time constraints? Summer is maybe different than the school year. I've coached a fair number of stay-at-home moms, and their summers are really busy and they can't train much. They can do a good bit of training during the school year because they have that 6 to 8 hour window a day after they drop the kids off where they don't have a ton of, they're not tied down and needing to be really, really present. So keeping that in mind with an athlete as they kind of, the seasons of life change. And then where's the athlete at in training progression? Then when we kind of have an idea of that micro, how's the training been? Then we plan each individual session, right? So that's when we drop in, here today you're going to do this bike interval. Here today you're going to do this swim workout. We usually like to start with the recovery days. When is the athlete going to rest? And not just rest, when are they going to absorb and adapt to the training? Depending on the level of athlete, that doesn't necessarily mean an off day, but it's a day where their average CTL or their TSS for the day is below their average chronic training load. So if their CTL is 100, an adaptation day is going to be something where, or a deload day is something where the TSS they get is less than 100, probably quite a bit less than 100, because they're probably going to have some days that are a lot above. So we look at kind of the recovery or absorb days first. Then what are the key sessions we want to get in? Then what's the supplemental aerobic work? All of that supplemental work does contribute to the chronic training load as well. So depending on the year or the time of year, that may be equally as important as a key session because we're trying to build just chronic load. We're trying to build fatigue resistance rather than specific race prep sessions. Then once you do the workout, we go in and analyze it. And that's kind of what we're going to get a little more into in depth tonight. What was prescribed? Was the basics of that what was prescribed accomplished? Did the athlete hit pace? Did they hit their power number? Did it happen? Look at the data. Um, how did the data interact? So how did pace and heart rate correlate to each other? How did pace and power correlate to each other? And then the qualitative feedback. That's the piece you guys provide in your Training Peaks comments. How did you feel? I always tell athletes, I can look at an athlete putting out 200 watts on an interval. It makes a big difference if they were slobbering all over the top tube, crying with blood coming out of their lungs, or if it felt really easy, really relaxed, really aerobic. The number's the same, 200 watts. How they got that number makes a big difference for me. And I can get an idea of that from heart rate data. But hearing the athletes say it makes a huge difference. And a lot of athletes, when I get good qualitative feedback, I'm able to do a lot more, say, for instance, updating training zones and things like that. I'll often move an athlete's FTP up 10 or 15 watts or drop their threshold pace running or swimming just based off the qualitative feedback, because I'm hearing, understanding that, hey, they've progressed in their fitness. I don't necessarily want to make them do an FTP test, but they're progressing, so I'm going to update their zones. I know I'm talking fast. Amy jumped on. Amy, we'd said if you want to unmute and jump in at any point, I'll try to pause. Is there anything you have to add yet, Amy? Excellent. All right. Again, if there's something Amy or Kelly want to add, feel free, just wave at me. I'll try to take some pauses. One thing that's really important to remember, and one of the big things that a coach brings to the table above and beyond a training plan, is the acknowledgement that no two athletes are the same. Like I said before, they might have the same race goal, but their athletic history, their age, their lifestyle circumstances are all completely different. Same way, you could have two people that come in with really similar athletic backgrounds, but they might have different race goals or training goals. And each of those is addressed as an individual. So this is just showing how I set up the week of a week of training. One is an athlete who races Ironman and Ironman 70.3 events. The other is an athlete I have training to run their first half marathon and get a little faster at the 5K. Totally different athletes, totally different approach. Some of the workouts might be similar. We still do endurance runs. We still do band activations. How all of those work, though, is totally different. So I think that's one important thing to always remember. Each athlete is unique in that way, and again, largely it's what they have going on in life. Go for it, Amy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And obviously, also, CTL doesn't know if you have a 3 month old newborn and didn't get a wink of sleep the night before. Training Peaks might say, "Hey, you haven't been training much. You're pretty fresh." And you're thinking, "I am not fresh. I am smoked." And that's where the qualitative piece comes in again. The metrics are useful for that as well, but that qualitative piece helping us as coaches understand how you're responding to the training. Okay. The ability to analyze and look at the data obviously starts with the collection of the data. I like to say that the only thing worse than no data is bad data, because if we don't have the data, if we don't have power, okay, we'll just look at the qualitative feedback. What is really difficult is when we see a power number and we go, "Ooh, is that right? Did the athlete calibrate the power meter? I'm not sure. It could be right. That'd be awesome." I actually had an athlete do this years ago. I let borrow some power pedals for a race, and they pushed a lot of power. And I was thinking, wow, this person maybe is like elite cyclist. That doesn't seem real. It was really high, not impossible, but I didn't really know. Came and did a power test. Sure enough, the power was probably about 30 watts off in the race. So it's one of those things that you may not notice if you're doing a workout, that your power meter's 20 watts off. But trying to get as accurate data as possible is really important to be able to analyze it. Um, Same thing said there. Accuracy is important when it comes to data collection and analysis. Qualitative feedback and athlete awareness help calibrate the data appropriately. So, a good example of that is, this is what often happens to me: is I go out on a ride and I'm looking at the power number and it seems pretty darn low. So I don't know if my legs are feeling bad or the power meter's reading wrong. So I'll stop, recalibrate, and unfortunately, the power was reading correctly. I'm just, not feeling my best. Um, but it's important to, by paying attention to how you're feeling, you start to get an idea of heart rate is probably the one I see that's off the most, where if you're used to using it and paying attention and looking at it, you can look at a heart rate number while you're doing a session and understand how you're breathing and go, that's probably not accurate. I'm going to disregard, so to speak, or put a comment to let my coach know to disregard the heart rate data. um, you wouldn't know that if you're not used to paying attention and being observant of those things. Along with this, kind of is more in line with executing the workout, but collecting good data is obviously part of that. Making sure you ask before the workout, what is the purpose of the workout? Is it an easy aerobic ride? Is it threshold intervals? Is it VO2 max intervals? Is it race simulation? And then the next logical question is, how can I best accomplish that purpose? How can I get the cleanest data, not for the sake of getting the data, but understanding that by getting clean data, you're also doing the workout really well and getting the correct physiological benefit from it. And that has to do with location, the type of equipment you use, and possibly fueling. If you eat lunch, if you don't bring nutrition and you're not able to um, do the workout very well, as coaches, one, there's just not good data because you kind of weren't able to do the workout because you were tired. So we're not able to draw conclusions on your actual fitness. There's a saying, bad days can be a fluke, good days can't be a fluke, and I'm a big believer of that. If you can produce a certain output, you can do that. If you're producing under that, there's another reason causing that. Go ahead, Amy. Mhm. Yep. Yep. 100%. Obviously, if someone lives locally, it's a little easier for locally to San Antonio or to Atlanta, where Amy is. Um, it's a little easier for us to recommend potential routes and loops. But I think that's just a good question to ask, with time constraints in mind, of course. Um, but I know I definitely, when I'm training, I don't like to drive very far for sessions, but I will think about which direction maybe I go, or am I going to a specific. Um, Probably the most common is running. If I have a certain run workout, I'm not afraid to go to a make a loop on the greenway or something like that, so I can do multiple laps. That's pretty flat. I can change shoes for the faster pace of the workout to help me hit the sessions, and I can fuel. And it's not the most entertaining thing to do a 20-mile run on a 2 or 3 mile loop, but it feels really good to nail a workout, and get good data from it. And then last thing on that is just remembering to train with the data, not by the data. Um, I give athletes a hard time sometimes because I grew up. Say grew up. I started triathlon in the era where I would write my workouts on a note card and tape it onto the top tube and count my pedal strokes to because I didn't even have the money to buy a cadence sensor when I was 14. So if I was supposed to do cadence drills, I would count how many times my leg went around in 60 seconds. Um, and so there's a bit of, when I look at a workout, I kind of try to get an overview of it. And now with how they sync to our watches, we kind of just, that's our coach in real time. I think it's important to do an overview ahead of time to sort of understand, okay, these are the blocks the workout's going to have. It's usually in patterns, so that you're able to adjust or adapt if necessary. A good example I have of this is, I had an Ironman ride years ago that had some short sprints at the beginning and then some long tempo efforts. And I was doing it with another athlete, and he had uploaded it into his Garmin. I almost never use the workout, like follow the workout on my Garmin. I'll read it and then manually lap. And he had uploaded it so he could, keep track of it. And we were about to start our 20-second sprints because the warm up was finishing. And he said, okay, we're going in 5 seconds. Well, we were just starting down this really long hill. Sorry, Amber Alert. You guys might have got that too. We were just starting down this hill. And so he starts sprinting in his tri bike down the hill. And I was like, okay, I know the warm up was an hour. I'm going to wait an hour and 1 minute until I'm at the bottom of the hill and do my first sprint on the uphill. It makes no sense to do the first sprint on a downhill when I'm going super fast already. But the workout says I have to do a sprint now. So that's an idea of kind of training with, I was using the data, of course, but I was also being mindful of where I was and my surroundings and what the purpose was. And I was going to be able to accomplish that purpose better by waiting until the uphill to start the sprint. Okay. Swim workouts. I also realized I did not. Well, Dylan will. Okay, swim workouts. Um, these are. I don't know if the hardest time is the right word, but this is where the getting lost in the splits, because swimming we have so many more splits, it can be a little confusing and it's not super easy and intuitive, for us coaches. And Amy can jump in and contradict if she wants. But often what I'm doing is, most swim workouts, I'm looking for the consistency of the splits. So if they're supposed to be like this workout is written, 8/100s steady zone 2, then I'm going to just do a scroll through to see, all right, were they all within a tight range? Did they fall off at all? did one slow down drastically. Um, might look at the change in stroke rate, which stroke rate shows up on the Garmin. Let's see if I can over here, down here. Um, so can look as the splits progress. Does the athlete's cadence or stroke rate change at all? That could signify muscular fatigue, as well as comparison to previous workouts. I don't really use heart rate swimming. Most people are just using their watch, not a chest strap or earpiece, and so I'm never quite sure on the reliability of the heart rate data. You can see on this that it certainly tracks a bit with the intensity, but some of the peaks don't exactly fall where you think a peak would be. When it comes to planning a workout, I always remind people the time we put, the swim time, that's an estimate of roughly how long you'll be in the water. So when you're swimming with a Garmin and lapping it, it's only taking the time you spent swimming. Um, so it's gonna always show you did shorter. So for instance, this athlete, the workout was 43 minutes completed. They did have to get out a little early, and that's where the qualitative feedback was super important. Of hey, here's why I had to get out early, but also here's how I felt. I noticed I was holding 130s today easier than 140s, or it can also be really helpful to know, did you swim in a long course pool versus a short course pool? Were you yards versus meters? Some of that context is really important. I do have some athletes that often switch pools, and so they'll be telling me their splits, and I'm like, that seems like kind of fast or kind of slow, and then I'll verify that you were in yards today, right? Or was it long course or were you at the short course pool? That helps put it all in context. It's more than just a time, a split, understanding the context of that, and then the feedback in swimming. I think is really the most important, um, because swimming is so much technique oriented. Just going harder or more effort, or even just faster from more effort, doesn't necessarily indicate that you've actually progress, whether it's fitness or technique. So if an athlete's newer to the sport and we're working on the technical side, um, their feedback can help us understand, hey, you didn't need as much rest or you didn't feel as out of breath swimming the same pace today. That means you're getting more efficient. Now we can start extending it out. One of the things I really encourage athletes to do as well is when we put a swim workout in, and a lot of times it'll say, here's a drill or here's something to work on. When the athlete gives feedback of how they felt or what they noticed in their stroke, I've had a lot that I can actually guide and prompt, yes, and also think about this and think about this. And they're, even though I've never seen them swim, just through the conversation and their feedback, as well as looking at the splits, we can make some headway and progress their swim, where they're actually improving. I definitely encourage everyone, if you can swim with a coach on deck, or with a group that's a quality masters group, that's definitely ideal. But that's not realistic for everyone because of time or location. And so being able to keep track of, how fast did I go today? What did I notice that my elbow was doing, that my feet were doing? And then us coaches can provide that feedback of cueing. A lot of the interaction on swimming is not as much about the pure data, is what I find. It's about some of that qualitative technical cueing. So that's where we can see more improvement in the swim than just purely go faster today, is having a better understanding of our body awareness in the water. And yes, that's really difficult to do when you don't see someone. But I have seen it work. I have seen it progress. I have seen athletes become more observant of themselves and improve their swimming just through that interaction on a Training Peaks workout. Yeah, 100%. I'm also going to add those of you in San Antonio know we have a lot of storms right now. Um, if my internet or power goes out and I disappear off the screen, um, we'll just reschedule for another time. That's probably what happened. I just heard a big thunderclap outside the office. So um, just so you're aware, if I disappear all of a sudden, we might just need to reschedule if we lose power or something like that. Any questions from athletes on swimming, or just anything at all related to swimming feedback? Um, Go for it. Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, it definitely will impact a little bit. If you have the watch running where it's capturing all the volume, it's not going to vary quite as much. So what happens when you lap the watch is your you say you have your threshold swim pace set at 130 per 100 and you're swimming 100s, and maybe you're coming in a little slower than threshold, 132, 133, 135 on a 15 seconds rest. When you're lapping your Garmin every time, if you do 2100s like that, and you go 30 minutes, Garmin thinks it basically smashes all those intervals together, and it thinks you just did 30 minutes at almost threshold pace, 132 per 100. Yes, sort of, but you were taking breaks in between each one. It'd be like if you went and did 2400s on the track at your threshold pace. Um, if you took 30 seconds rest or a minute rest between them all, that's way different than going and doing 5 miles straight at threshold. It feels way different. You're way less tired. Um, if you just let the watch run, it's going to still take the volume. It'll now, the way TSS is calculated, it will now show a lower intensity factor, and I'm gonna go over those a little bit here in a second. It will show a lower intensity factor because it's multiplying that by the time, and now the time is also longer because you did um, say 35 or 36 minutes to do uh, 2100s because the rest is included in that. It's going to multiply that little bit slower intensity factor by a longer time, so it gets close. Um, Usually, you're still going to get higher TSS by lapping every single time, and that's also where your workout will often turn yellow at the end because you didn't get the total time. So there's not really a right or wrong. What I tend to do is for an athlete is have their threshold swim settings sometimes a tiny bit faster than it actually is, because I don't want an athlete to go do a 45-minute swim and get 80 TSS from that. They would have to go, run over an hour or something like that to get that amount of TSS, and it doesn't correlate quite the same. That's a really good question, though. That's a common one. Anyone else on swimming? Okay, cycling. Um, Things we look at. The easiest first is, did you hit the power? So if it said to do this many watts, we can go in and select each interval and want to know, hey, did you hit the power? Um, One reminder is, as coaches, we're usually on Training Peaks on the desktop on a computer, pretty rarely on the app. It just doesn't give enough. I kind of usually wait till I can get in front of a computer and look at it and work and respond and type on a keyboard and do all of that. Um, so some of the things that are maybe harder to see or you don't get to see on the mobile, you do see a little more robust on the app. Those of you that train with power know how much power jumps around all the time, and you see how that's captured in the purple line down here. The red line you see is obviously heart rate, and you see how that obviously stays a little bit more stable. It doesn't respond as quickly. It doesn't drop as quickly. It's a little bit flatter line. Um, one of the first things I look at right off the bat is if I know I can look at this structured workout builder and know, okay, I had 3 by 20 minute reps in there. I can quickly look at the graph and I should be able to pick out where those reps occurred, right? I should be able to grab those 20 minutes. You can see on this one, it's a little hard. You can kind of see where they are, but they're not super clear pronounced. You see the athletes. This was also not threshold. It was LT1, but you see a lot of the warm up is pretty close to the intervals. It's not super clear where the intervals and the rest is. You can definitely get a bit of an idea, but it's maybe a bit more stochastic than would be ideal for a super steady state. The other things we're going to look at, and I think we'll go over that next, are variability index. I know some of this is going to get a little into the weeds. So you may not, if you don't understand everything, I'll do my best to cover it real briefly. Training Peaks also has some good just definitions of the terms. So we have variability index. That's your VI. That essentially tells how steady your power was. It's your average, your normalized power divided by your average power. So it measures how up and down, how close are they. Your intensity factor, that tells you what percentage of threshold you are riding. If you are above 1.0, then you are riding above for that interval or segment. You are riding above your threshold. Threshold is 1. If you're below, then that interval is below threshold. So depending on what we're going for, that number might be, a different sort of decimal. We can look at aerobic efficiency. That's EF. So that matches your power and your heart rate, and just compares them. That works best on steadier rides. It doesn't, or it also works on runs. It doesn't work great when you're doing a lot of intervals and things are varying. For the aerobic efficiency, it works a little better if it's more of a steady state. We can also look at time and zone, whether that's power or heart rate zone. And then we can look at decoupling. That's, does your heart rate on a steady ride, does the heart rate and power stay evenly matched, or does the heart rate drift up and the power drift down? Other things obviously are cadence, torque, speed. A lot of athletes really rely on speed. Speed, it matters in racing. It doesn't matter in training, other than it's an indicator of, is the power you're producing turning into speed on the road. That's our goal. There's a lot of other factors, of course, aerodynamics, rolling resistance, things like that. Speed tells us, though, the power, the workouts we do, that builds the engine. When we apply that engine to the pedals, we're trying to get as much speed for that as possible. And on race day, that's the goal, is to kind of have the balance of power and speed. You obviously can't push too hard. There's kind of a budget of power you have. So within that power budget, how can you go as fast as possible? So I don't look at speed too much, especially when athletes ride different kinds of bikes. It's, obviously on a mountain bike, you're going to go slower than on a road bike or a triathlon bike, even though your power may be identical. If you do ride the same bike, also hills, terrain make a big difference. If you do ride the same kind of bike, you can get an idea of, hey, am I going a decent speed for the power, or is there room to improve maybe in position or aerodynamics, things like that. Um, this is just highlighting again, being able to see intervals clearly. So I marked down this workout was a 12 by 1 minutes plus 2 by 10 minutes. You can see really easily, I did not include heart rate. I should have snapped that, but you can see really clearly where each 1 minute effort occurs. And then you can see pretty clearly where each 10-minute effort occurs. You see on the warm up and cool down, there are some power spikes. For the most part, they are substantially lower than the actual blips on the workout. You see at the beginning there was some efforts that, or a hill or something that was pretty similar to the 1 minute efforts, but you can see once the workout started, it was very clear: interval rest, interval rest, interval rest. That's kind of what I mean by real quickly. I should be able to look at a power number and see, oh, yep, looks like they did a good job executing. Now let me hone in and see what those numbers are. This is also where I tell athletes, if the workout's executed correctly and you mess up the laps, doesn't really matter, because we should be able to see these super easily and we can highlight that. And if it was a 10-minute interval and we highlight, 9 minutes and 58 seconds of it with our cursor, we can get the idea of what did you accomplish from that. And again, when the effort is matched according to the workout description, we can easily see where it occurred, and then we can dial into those splits. This session is a good example of where I wouldn't know exactly where to highlight the 20-minute efforts to understand, when did the athlete start this number or this effort? When did they finish it? Hopefully they used lap, because I couldn't go in and highlight it on my own. I could do some guessing. A couple of them seem pretty clear, but not for sure. This one, I can really clearly see where each effort occurred. A little more on variability, intensity factor, decoupling, and EF. These are two different rides. Both of these rides are aerobic endurance rides. Okay, so the prescriptions were roughly the same: go ride, steady aerobic endurance power. The durations are a little off. TSS are a little different. I'm going to just kind of highlight what's similar and what's different. Similar is the intensity factor. It's actually identical. Both athletes rode at the exact same percentage of threshold. You see that? 1.56 here. Let me see if I can do cool cursor things. 0.56 there, 0.56 there. That's based off their normalized power, okay? So these are two different athletes, so that means their normalized power was the same percentage of threshold, okay? So their intensity factor was identical. When we look at variability index, we see a massive difference. This athlete had a variability index of 1.04. 1.00 means perfectly steady. This athlete has a variability index of 1.31. What does that mean? It basically means this athlete, their average power here was very close to their normalized power. You see that? It was 7 watts off at a higher power number. This athlete, normalized power 123, average power of 94. So nearly a 30-watt difference. And when you divide it as a percentage, it's substantially higher variability index. What this tells me as a coach right off the bat is blue athlete, we'll call him, was probably coasting a lot, not pedaling on downhills, was sprinting up hills. Basically, they weren't riding very steady. It was very, very variable ride. And we see that from the variability index. This variability index is similar to what I would see in an actual bike race or a bike crit, where you're sprinting and then cornering and sprinting and coasting. So yes, it tells me a little bit about the physiology of what actually happened with the workout. Um, on the decoupling is throughout the session, does your heart rate stay the same, kind of same distance from power? That's maybe the best way to think of it. What you actually see is this first athlete had, so we want a lower decoupling rate. This first athlete had a decoupling rate of 5%. Athlete 2 had 1%. Why was athlete 2 such a good decoupling? Likely, it's because of the lack of steady pedaling. So some of the coasting, maybe they weren't sprinting, they were just riding steady or coasting. And so as they coasted, it brought their heart rate down. So the normalized power was, again, staying at that 0.56. Because their average was so much low, their heart rate kept having time to kind of drop because they would take a break from pedaling. So decoupling is a great way to look at how is your fitness progressing. When you go out and ride 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours really steady, by the end of it, does your heart rate shoot up, or does your power fall off? Obviously, in the summer, that starts to happen a lot. We get hot towards the end, so it's also a good indicator of how well are you handling the heat. You're going to decouple some. That's a given. You can look at kind of your own and oh, thanks, Amy, and kind of understand, is my heat adaptation improving? And then the other one I kind of highlighted is EF. That's aerobic efficiency. So that's your power divided by your heart rate. That's going to be unique to each individual because everyone has different power. Bigger people, people that just push more power because they're taller, bigger, stronger, are always going to have a higher EF. So within yourself, it tells you essentially how aerobically strong you are. This is one of the biggest things I notice, going from winter to summer or going from fit to unfit is what my EF is during aerobic work. When I'm unfit, I'm going to look and see an EF of, for me, actually probably this 1.3, 1.4. When I'm really fit, might see closer to 1.7, 1.8. If it's hot, the EF is going to be a little bit lower because heart rate's it's going to be higher. So again, you see here, again, you can't really compare athlete to athlete, but it would be good if this athlete, well, basically what you're seeing is their power was lower than your heart rate. Certainly a good benchmark to look at. Okay, can I get, when I'm riding steady, can I get my power higher than my average heart rate? Any questions on some of these little things? I know I just blew through EF, VI, all that stuff, and it's a little complex. All right, everyone, fully overwhelmed. Oh, go ahead. Um, well, on both of EF is again super individual, so that doesn't really tell us. Honestly, a better indicator would be what's someone's FTP. It's really hard to. There's not like a just if you get your EF to 1.0. So I'll use the example. If you have a female who weighs 50 kilograms, she's not going to push a lot of power at all. She's going to push 100, 120 watts. So if she's pushing 120 watts and her heart rate's 130, she's going to have an EF below 1. Because she only weighs 50 kilograms, because maybe she's really small and arrow, she might still go pretty fast for that power. She might be going 20 miles an hour at 120 watts. You could have a 230-pound male who's also going 20 miles an hour, but to do that, he's pushing 180 watts. Because he's pushing 180 watts, that's kind of his aerobic zone. Maybe his heart rate's only 130 as well. Well, you divide his power by his heart rate, his EF is 1.2 or something like that. Um, Two athletes, same speed, same IF, same intensity factor, same percentage of threshold, perhaps. EF, totally different because largely just bigger people push more power naturally because they're bigger, and smaller people push less power. So there's not like a universal EF. Um, and then on IF, intensity factor, that is just a percentage of threshold. So what we see there is you're typically going to race a half Ironman at around, they say professionals will race in the 80s. Most age groupers I see are more like 68 to 78% of threshold for a half Ironman. The shorter you're riding, the higher percentage of threshold you can ride. But let's say 70 to 80% of threshold. Some of that depends on whether you do 78% or 74%, might depend on some of the specific work you do. That's where improving threshold helps you go faster. If you improve your threshold from 150 watts to 170 watts, a 20-watt increase, even if you're still riding at 75% of threshold, you're now riding substantially more power, so you're going faster. Same thing. This again goes to where triathlon does favor a bit bigger, taller people who can also get really aero. If, again, you're a 220-pound male and maybe you can push 250, or maybe your threshold is 300 watts. Well, 75% of 300 watts is 225, I think. It's a pretty big number. A lot more than 75% of 200 watts or 150 watts. So the intensity factor is also unique to you and your threshold. It's not an absolute number. The last thing we on VI when racing, normally for triathlon, we're going to see, ideally, we see pretty low VIs. The hillier the course, the more varied your power should be. You should be able to push harder up the hill and a little less down the hill. And the flatter the course, the more steady it should be. I just realized I've already been going 50 minutes almost, so I'm gonna keep rolling. And I'll still pause for a few questions. Another thing I look at if we're looking for a steady ride is time and zone. So you can see this athlete, I think this was the same workouts I was comparing. So the athlete that had really varied power, when I go and look at the workout, I can see that. Over here, they spent 28% of their ride, 34 minutes of their ride at less than 50 watts. So 0 to 50 watts. The other athlete spent 6%, 5 minutes of the ride at less than 50 watts. You can see this power is not zones, it's in bins. So this is 0 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 to 150, so on. So you see all the power was clumped in a very tight, very narrow range the whole time. It was super steady. It was super narrow. This athlete, the power was in a lot of different bins. There's a lot of different power created at different times. So time and zone is a quick way also to look at, hey, the joke I always tell people is if you spent 34 minutes of your 2-hour ride at almost 0 watts, was that a 2-hour ride or was that an hour and a half ride? Because 25%, 28% of the ride, you weren't really pedaling. If you're not pedaling, you're not making any adaptations. And on run workouts, things we look at, number one is pace. Pace or speed works the best for running. Another one is cadence. A good way, taller people will tend to have a little bit lower cadence. Shorter people will often have higher cadence. Making sure our cadence stays up as we age. As we do a lot of endurance training, our cadence has a tendency to drift down. So it's a really good cue, something to look at. More as kind of like a technique prompter. if an athlete uses heart rate, we can obviously do that, and look and compare that. This is where I probably see the most erroneous data is my runners that just wear their watch and the watch is loose or it doesn't capture good data and their heart rate's all over the place. So a lot of times, a lot of runners I have, the only thing we're using is pace because their heart rate data is so consistently bad. It was just too much work to clean it up every single session because it was never correct. So I just end up disregarding it and we're going to use pace. Um, Not necessarily my favorite, but if someone's only going to run with their watch and the watch consistently gives bad data, then there's kind of no point in trying to use that as a thing to analyze. This workout, you can see it was mile repeats. Once again, very very similar to the bike. You can clearly see where the mile reps are. You can clearly see the heart rate goes up each time, and you can see it even progresses up a bit throughout the session. You can look at on running some of the same things as on the bike, as far as decoupling, as far as aerobic efficiency for steady paces, as far as time and zones. I tend to use heart rate zones a little more if I'm using heart rate with someone. I tend to use the heart rate zones a little more than the pace zones running. I'm honestly not 100% sure why. I think if an athlete is doing a workout by pace and they have accurate heart rate data, the heart rate tells me um, a little bit more for the pace what their fitness is, more than just doing the pace alone. So if an athlete's running 8-minute pace and their heart rate's in zone 4, I know that's definitely not an aerobic effort, which is maybe something you see when athletes are starting. You can also tell sort of maybe how well a workout was executed. I also use the other way I use heart rate is sometimes to check if an athlete worked hard enough. If I give them a VO2 workout and I don't see any time in zone 5, that could be a concern. I wanted your heart rate to be in zone 5 and it didn't get that high. So are you unable to get it that high? Why is that? Sometimes when it's really cold and we're going fast, the heart rate won't get up quite as high, but you should still see it in um, zone 4 at least. Okay, this is little. I think the best way to do this will be the chat box. Any questions on running? I guess before we do the group exercise. Go for it. Yeah, that's a really good question. People are pretty individual when it comes to heart rate. Some athletes naturally have. I have athletes that their threshold heart rate's in the mid, maybe even high 180s, and they can hold that for a half marathon. I have others that threshold for a half marathon might be 160s, and they might run similar paces. Um, so yeah, it's important that the heart rate zones are set correct for the individual. I usually, if I have zero data on someone, I'll pick a number kind of in the middle. I'll just set their threshold heart rate at 170 to 175 for sure. If you're looking at a normative distribution, things are clumped in that middle area, so I know that's going to be pretty darn close. And then when we do a race or a test, I can set it accurately. But heart rate, yeah, is definitely one that does vary individual to individual. It will also decline a bit as we age. So if you're in your 40s or 50s, you're probably going to hold a little bit lower heart rate than you did in your 20s. I have some young athletes I coach, like 12, 13, 14, that I consult with, and they can hit some pretty high heart rate numbers. And they're just fine going up to 207 or something like that. Which is, yeah, it's kind of funny to see. Yeah, yeah, you start to feel it. Yeah, for sure. And you'll often, another common question, you'll usually see lower heart rates on the bike than the run. Most of the time, it's around, I see 8 to 10. The only difference is if someone's a well trained cyclist, they could be they could be closer. But a lot of triathletes, I'm going to see their bike heart rates are, or the bike heart rate zones are 8 to 10 beats lower than their run zones, just because the body mass is supported in cycling. All right, group exercise. Let's see if I can find the chat. So there is no right or wrong on this. The goal is just, um, throw in the chat things you notice that stand out, right or wrong, from the workout. It's not necessarily a deep dive analysis, but just kind of, hey, you're a coach, you jumped on, you're just doing a scan. We're not diving into the splits here, but we're just seeing if anything's jump out to us at first. So, throw those in the chat as they come up, and I will try to figure out how to. Here we go. Boom. Okay, Garrett nailed one of the big ones. First thing he sees, the swim TSS is 1. So that probably means, honestly, what this probably means is they don't have swim zones set up yet. You can set up, individual zones for each sport. There's a speed zone. And if the speed zone, if an athlete has a brand new account or it was just created and no one ever set up a specific swim zone, the speed zone might be set at, 15 miles an hour or something like that. And so then, you know, they did a swim workout and they covered a little over a mile in an hour and 10 minutes. So they're going to get no TSS for that. So that means, what I'll usually do here, it's a little hard to see, but you can, right here underneath STSS, there's a little arrow. You can select that and change it to heart rate. So a lot of times I'll do that, or I'll just type in a manual number real quick and then make sure they have an updated zone. Um, so I might just match it to what was estimated, 60. One thing to remember with TSS is that it's this big accumulation number, so it doesn't make a big difference if what we got was 65 or 60 or 55. Those are all much closer than 1. It's kind of just adding to the whole data set. That's what we're trying to do. Yeah, Bryce and Kelly both noticed the IF. That's related to the same thing. Is basically whatever their speed zone is. It shows you basically did, again, if it's 15 miles an hour as your threshold speed, and because you don't have a swim zone set up, then it says, well, you just went, basically 1 mile an hour for, an hour and 10 minutes. So you essentially get, like, you're in the percentage of threshold you're at is super, super low, almost nothing. Uh, Lex, yeah, good question on the heart rate. I do the same. I pretty much disregard it in the water. It's kind of curious, fun to look at. Maybe I don't usually use it to draw conclusions because I'm not sure how accurate the data is. Trying to see if there's anything off. Yeah, okay. So Kelly had a good point. This athlete, when they uploaded, did not put anything in here for the RPE number when they uploaded from their watch. Or you can always go into the app and put it in manually. So they didn't use any of the qualitative basic metrics of how did you feel and how hard it was. Maybe they put it in the comments, and that would tell us. But yeah, there's no qualitative data there. All right. This is a run session. What do we notice? Is heart rate range wide in regards to the run, Kelly, or is that the swim still? Oh, yes. I'll go back one. Um, so yeah, the difference between the average, the max, the minimum. Some of that minimum was probably captured resting on the wall. So it's yeah, it'd be the same as if on the bike your average heart rate at the water stop was collected, that kind of thing. And again, I'm not necessarily looking for anything wrong as a coach. We don't go into a workout just like something's wrong with it. That's kind of the idea of these. Is I'm just throwing a session in front of you. Um, okay, Garrett said looks like weird heart rate data in the first. Um, Definitely, you see this little bump over here. Now, that's not crazy weird, and it's pretty normal. So it's not like a crazy outlier, I should say, compared to the rest of the workout. It's not uncommon to see heart rate jump a little at the beginning, uh, and then sort of stabilize. It's the same as if I'm doing a lactate test on someone. At the end of the warm up, their lactate is usually higher than it is stage 1 or 2. The aerobic system takes a little while to get going. So that could be wrong heart rate data. It's not a high enough peak or anything to actually skew the workout data that much. So, or set any new peaks. So I'm not really too worried about it. Um, yeah, here on the dropout, that is most likely, yeah, either a quick dropout. Heart rate also dropped, so it's probably not a pace dropout. They probably hopped. Um, well, first I'll say, yeah. So Sarah asked if there's a steady endurance workout. So first I'll say, I see a file like this. It's most likely a treadmill run, which it is. It's so flat. It's nearly impossible to run this consistently outside in the real world. So first thing I go is like, oh, they probably ran indoors. So then this dropout here could just be, I don't know, tying a shoe, something like that. They just hop on and off. Lex had the point at the end here that you definitely see a little bit of decoupling, a little bit of drift. You see those lines totally separate. We can see from the green, the pace is pretty flat the whole time. Pace is stable. Again, that's how I know it's likely a treadmill workout. And you see heart rate does start kind of below that green line, and then by the end it drifts up above. That doesn't necessarily mean the athlete's unfit. It just means they were probably running on a treadmill and yeah, got a little dehydrated. It was a kind of long run, an hour 40. So they were fatiguing at the end. And in reality, that's accomplishing the goal of the session, right? It's pushing that endurance up a little bit, where the drift isn't crazy, but they definitely got an aerobic benefit from this workout. It was really stable. Heart rate kind of drifted at the end. They were probably a little hot, a little dehydrated. Everything else looks pretty good. Some people may question others may have is power data on the run. Unless you have a stride pod, I don't really pay attention to it. From the watch is I just don't know if it's accurate. Basically, the stride pods are pretty good, and I have prescribed workouts for people with those. But the Garmin power calculation, I do not trust. So all in all, this is a quick, um, one that doesn't take long to analyze. Just pop it up, look at. I would look at the comments. I'd say, oh, yeah, steady endurance run on the treadmill. See how they felt. Um, things look things look good overall. No news is good news sometimes. Okay, and here's a bike workout. Things people notice. Let Pink is the power, red is the heart rate. Um, so to answer Lex's question, what happened at lap 8? I just highlighted lap 8 because that was if you read the title of the workout, it's 20 minutes plus 2 by 6. Again, you can see pretty quickly, like, oh, that's where the athlete did their 20-minute effort. Um, when you click it, you see over here this difference in the parentheses is the total duration, and then the 20 is the lap duration. So this basically means there's 54 seconds stopped, and you see that in the power output here. So what that probably means is it's not a deal breaker. It probably means the athlete hit a light in the middle of their interval, or something caused them to have to stop for 54 seconds. Kelly brought up the power spike. You definitely see one right here for sure. Not sure why. It could be a hill. It's could be bad data, but the rest of the data is so stable. That's probably something that did actually happen. Maybe it was a turn or a corner, something like that. Anything else stand out to people? Um, okay, Steve said decoupling. So first off, on a workout like this, one, you would not look at decoupling for the whole ride, right? Any ride where there's multiple intervals, there's no real point in looking at decoupling. Of course, on your cooldown at the end of all your intervals, your heart rate's probably going to be higher than warming up before the intervals. We're not tracking a steady state thing. As far as during the intervals, this one was 20 minutes, and yeah, you see the decoupling was 1.3%, which is pretty good, pretty low. This is you can't measure decoupling on shorter reps. This is probably about as short as decoupling is kind of useful. What would be really interesting is if they were doing multiple 20-minute reps. We could measure decoupling. We could also measure the EF. So basically, looking at if the athlete does the same power each time, is their average heart rate the same each time, or does that drift up? That would be an interesting data piece. One other thing that's not a problem, but it is an oddity. You see here their variability index is less than 1. That should technically be impossible. Because it means their normalized power is lower than their average, which is kind of a weird. It usually means there was some sort of sprint before or after the workout, um, like right by the file that skewed it one way or the other. But I don't see that here, so I'm not exactly sure why that is. 0.99 is also very, very close to 1, similar to 1.01. So you see, regardless, the difference in the average and the normalized power was 2 watts over the course of 20 minutes. So this effort was, even though we see some spikes in there, the actual effort, according to the math, was incredibly steady. There was very, very little variability. All right. And finally, we've gone a little over time. I apologize. I can talk about training a good bit. Any last minute questions on people's minds? I think I did a better job recording this one than our last talk with Michelle, so I should be able to send out the notes and recordings, or maybe upload to YouTube. But any final questions from people? I'll also send out the slides. Yeah, there's definitely a lot there. Anyone else? Awesome. Well, thank you all for bearing with me. This has been my Training Peaks talk. There's a lot more I can talk about, so I'll try to put another one of these together maybe by the end of the year. And as always, of course, if I'm coaching you or you have another coach, love talking about this stuff. So you're welcome to schedule a call and we can dig into your files and show you what's going on and stuff. But everyone get some rest. Stay dry, and talk to you later.